The London season of 1817 glittered beneath thousands of candle flames, where crystal chandeliers reflected across polished ballroom floors and every whispered conversation carried the weight of fortune, reputation, and family ambition. In the years following the defeat of Napoleon, England celebrated peace with renewed enthusiasm, yet among the highest ranks of society another kind of battle quietly unfolded. Noble families negotiated marriages with the same careful precision once reserved for military alliances, believing that estates, titles, and bloodlines were worth more than youthful affection. A successful match could rescue a declining house from ruin, while a broken engagement could stain a family's name for generations. Beneath embroidered gowns, immaculate tailcoats, and perfectly practiced smiles, countless hearts were expected to surrender to duty. Few names commanded greater respect than that of Duke Nathaniel Ashcombe. At 31 years of age, he possessed vast Yorkshire estates, a magnificent London residence overlooking Grosvenor Square, and an ancient title that stretched back centuries. Tall, disciplined, and composed almost to severity, Nathaniel had inherited the dukedom after the untimely death of his father, forcing him to shoulder responsibilities while many young noblemen still chased pleasure. His years connected with Britain's long struggle against France had hardened him into a man who trusted discipline over sentiment. He believed order preserved families, sacrifice protected honor, and emotions too often clouded sound judgment. London admired his integrity, though many quietly observed that no lady had ever succeeded in softening his guarded heart. Across the fashionable districts of Mayfair lived the Pembroke family, whose elegant manners concealed increasingly desperate circumstances. Earl Pembroke carried an ancient title but little remaining fortune. Years of poor harvests, expensive obligations, and inherited debts had reduced the family to maintaining appearances while creditors waited impatiently beyond polished front doors. Every invitation accepted, every carriage hired, and every new gown purchased represented another attempt to convince society that nothing had changed. The Earl understood a single advantageous marriage could preserve generations of family history from financial collapse. His greatest hope rested upon his eldest daughter, Lady Amelia Pembroke. At 26, Amelia possessed the effortless beauty celebrated in every drawing room. Gentlemen admired her graceful dancing, fashionable ladies copied her gowns, and elderly matrons predicted she would soon become one of England's most admired duchesses. Yet beneath her polished smile she guarded a dangerous secret. During the celebrations marking the return of peace, she had fallen deeply in love with Captain Edward Sinclair, a cavalry officer of respectable birth but modest fortune. Their affection had grown quietly through stolen conversations and carefully supervised walks, though both understood that an impoverished soldier could never satisfy an ambitious aristocratic father. Standing almost unnoticed beside Amelia through much of her life was Lady Charlotte Pembroke. At 23, Charlotte lacked her sister's celebrated beauty, yet possessed a calm intelligence that many overlooked until they spent time in her company. She preferred reading estate accounts to gossip, visiting tenant cottages rather than fashionable shops, and discussing literature or agriculture instead of the latest scandals. Servants respected her kindness because she remembered their names. Tenants admired her because she listened before speaking. Even her father privately admitted Charlotte possessed better judgment than anyone else in the household, though he rarely praised qualities that could not attract wealthy suitors. Charlotte had long accepted living within Amelia's brilliant shadow. Whenever guests arrived, conversations naturally drifted toward her elder sister's elegance and prospects, leaving Charlotte free to observe rather than compete. She felt no bitterness, only quiet resignation. She understood the expectations placed upon daughters of noble families, particularly those whose fortunes depended upon advantageous marriages. Love belonged to novels and poetry. Reality demanded obedience, sacrifice, and silence. When Earl Pembroke received Nathaniel Ashcombe's formal proposal for Amelia, relief swept through the household like warm sunlight after relentless rain. The alliance promised security beyond imagination. The Duke would restore the Pembrokes' finances, while Amelia would become Duchess of Ashcombe, securing honor for both families. Lawyers immediately began preparing marriage settlements. Tailors worked tirelessly. Invitations were drafted. Society welcomed the approaching union as one of the season's grandest events. Only Amelia's smile grew increasingly uncertain. Late one evening, Charlotte found her sister standing alone beside an open window overlooking the moonlit gardens. Amelia's trembling hands clutched a folded letter sealed with dark blue wax. "I cannot do it," Amelia whispered. Charlotte needed no explanation. "You love him." Amelia nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Father says affection fades, but I know it will not. If I marry the Duke, I shall betray Edward every day of my life. Charlotte gently took her sister's hand. Running away would destroy everything. I know. Then why are you considering it? Because living honestly with nothing feels less terrifying than living comfortably with regret. Charlotte offered no answer. For the first time, duty and compassion stood before her as impossible equals. 3 nights before the wedding, Amelia vanished. She left behind only a brief letter begging forgiveness before departing with Captain Sinclair toward Scotland, where English parental consent laws held no authority over their marriage. By sunrise, the servants had discovered her empty room. By afternoon, whispers spread through London's drawing rooms faster than official announcements. By evening, every fashionable household discussed the scandal with equal measures of fascination and outrage. Earl Pembroke appeared to age 10 years within a single day. The carefully negotiated alliance lay in ruins. Creditors would certainly hear of Amelia's disgrace. Invitations were quietly withdrawn. Old friends suddenly found reasons to remain distant. Nathaniel arrived at Pembroke House the following morning. His expression revealed neither anger nor humiliation, only cold disappointment. He listened as the Earl apologized repeatedly, promising restitution impossible to provide. Finally, the desperate father spoke the words that froze the room. My younger daughter, Charlotte, would willingly fulfill the agreement. Charlotte stared at her father in stunned silence. No one asked whether she wished to marry the Duke. Her choice had already been made for her.
Charlotte scarcely remembered leaving the drawing room after her father's astonishing proposal. The polished corridors of Pembroke House suddenly felt narrower than ever before, every portrait of long-dead ancestors seeming to watch her with silent expectation. For generations, the Pembrokes had spoken of duty as though it were the highest virtue a gentleman or lady could possess. Now that same duty rested upon her shoulders, demanding the greatest sacrifice she had never imagined making. The Earl found her in the morning room overlooking the garden, where she stood motionless beside a window streaked with gentle spring rain. "My dear," he began quietly, "I would never ask this unless there were no other path." Charlotte turned to face him, her expression calm despite the turmoil beneath it. "No, father," she replied softly. "You would." His shoulders sagged beneath the truth of her words. "Our family is ruined if this marriage fails." "Our family was already ruined," Charlotte answered. Amelia simply refused to hide it. The Earl lowered his eyes. "I know I have asked too much of both my daughters." Charlotte's voice remained gentle. "She has chosen love. And you." She looked toward the grey skies beyond the glass. "I have not been given a choice." Silence settled between them. For the first time in many years, the Earl realized how often Charlotte had quietly surrendered her own wishes for the comfort of everyone around her. She had yielded music lessons so Amelia might have new gowns. She had postponed her own hopes whenever family finances demanded another sacrifice. She had never complained, believing peace within the household mattered more than recognition. Now he was asking her to surrender her future. By afternoon, discreet messages had been exchanged between the Ashcombe solicitors and the Pembroke family lawyers. Breaking the engagement entirely would create a public scandal damaging to both houses. Some influential relatives proposed a practical solution. Since Charlotte was unmarried, well-born, and of suitable age, the marriage contract could simply be amended with surprisingly little legal difficulty. Such substitutions were uncommon and undoubtedly whispered about, yet preserving aristocratic alliances often mattered more than romantic ideals. Nathaniel accepted the arrangement with remarkable composure. He neither protested nor expressed enthusiasm. To him, marriage had always represented responsibility rather than affection. If one Pembroke daughter fulfilled the agreement instead of another, the practical result remained nearly unchanged. Only one person seemed to understand how profoundly everything had altered: Charlotte. Over the following 2 days, London continued buzzing with speculation. Officially, Lady Amelia had fallen suddenly ill and withdrawn from public view. The explanation convinced almost no one. Gentlemen exchanged knowing glances at their clubs. Ladies whispered behind elegantly painted fans during musicales and afternoon calls. Every hour produced another exaggerated version of the truth.
Charlotte avoided society entirely. Instead, she occupied herself helping the household prepare for a wedding that scarcely felt like her own. Seamstresses hurriedly altered Amelia's gowns to fit Charlotte's slimmer figure. Jewelers reset family heirlooms. Invitations required careful revisions. Servants practiced addressing her as the future Duchess. Each adjustment reminded Charlotte that she was stepping into a life originally intended for someone else. Late the following evening, a message arrived from Ashcombe House requesting a private meeting before the wedding ceremony. Such interviews between engaged couples were unusual without proper chaperonage, yet extraordinary circumstances often created their own exceptions. Charlotte accepted. She arrived at the Duke's London residence shortly before sunset. Ashcombe House reflected generations of disciplined refinement rather than extravagant display. Marble floors echoed beneath measured footsteps. Portraits of former dukes lined richly panelled corridors. Every servant moved with practiced efficiency, speaking little and observing everything. Nathaniel received her in the library. Tall windows overlooked carefully ordered gardens where clipped hedges formed perfect geometric patterns. Shelves overflowing with leather-bound volumes climbed toward the ornate ceiling. A fire burned quietly despite the mild weather, lending warmth to an otherwise formal room. Charlotte entered with composed dignity. Nathaniel bowed respectfully. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I appreciate your willingness to preserve the agreement." Charlotte folded her hands before her. "I am fulfilling my family's obligation. I expected nothing less." His words sounded more like an acknowledgement of duty than gratitude. She studied him carefully. He remained every inch the disciplined aristocrat society admired, impeccably dressed, perfectly mannered, and emotionally distant. "I hope," she said quietly, "that we may at least begin honestly." Nathaniel inclined his head. "I have no desire to deceive you." Another silence followed. Charlotte sensed there was something he had not yet spoken, something carefully restrained. When he finally met her eyes again, his expression remained unreadable. "I will always honor my responsibilities." "I never doubted that. You shall have every comfort becoming your station." "I did not come here to discuss houses or income." For the first time, something almost resembling discomfort crossed his face. He walked slowly toward the tall windows before speaking again. "When this alliance was arranged." He hesitated. "It was your sister who was chosen." Charlotte remained still. "I understand." Nathaniel continued without turning around. "She possessed qualities expected of a duchess." Charlotte's heartbeat slowed. Then came the words that would remain with her forever. "Your sister was the better choice." The room fell utterly silent. Even the crackling fire seemed to fade. Nathaniel had spoken without cruelty in his voice. To him, it was simply an honest observation. He believed honesty preferable to false affection. He never imagined how deeply truth, spoken without kindness, could wound. Charlotte looked at the diamond engagement ring resting upon her hand. Only hours earlier it had symbolized duty. Now it felt like evidence of another woman's absence. She carefully slipped it from her finger. Nathaniel turned just in time to see the ring resting quietly in her open palm. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you doing?" Charlotte stepped forward. "I cannot marry a man who spends his future mourning the bride he truly wanted. I said only what was true." "So shall I." She gently placed the ring upon the polished mahogany table between them. "You deserve the woman you wish to marry." "And you?" he asked. "I deserve not to spend my life wondering whether every smile is offered to someone else's memory." For the first time in years, Nathaniel found himself without an immediate answer. Charlotte offered a graceful curtsy. "There will be gossip." "Yes." "There will be consequences." "I know." "You may never receive another proposal." A faint, sorrowful smile touched her lips. That would still be kinder than becoming someone's second choice. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the library doors. No tears stained her face. No accusations followed behind her. Only quiet dignity accompanied every step. Nathaniel remained standing beside the abandoned ring long after the doors had closed. Outside, Charlotte descended the stone steps of Ashcombe House into the cool evening air. The waiting carriage door opened. As it carried her away through London's lamplit streets, she knew she had surrendered wealth, security, and perhaps her only opportunity for marriage. Yet for the first time in her life, the future before her belonged to no one else's expectations. Back inside the silent library, the untouched ring continued glimmering beneath the firelight. For the first time since inheriting his title, Duke Nathaniel Ashcombe began to wonder whether duty alone could truly build a life. No official announcement appeared in the newspapers, yet among the aristocracy news travelled far faster than printed ink. Before breakfast had ended in Mayfair, hostesses whispered that the Duke of Ashcombe's wedding had been cancelled. By luncheon, some insisted Charlotte had fled in tears after being rejected. Others claimed the Duke had discovered some hidden fault in the younger Pembroke daughter. A few imaginative storytellers even suggested that both sisters had secretly loved the same man. The truth belonged to only two people. Neither intended to defend themselves. Within Pembroke House, silence replaced conversation. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, sensing the grief hanging over every room. Curtains remained partially drawn, although the morning sun shone brightly outside. Every knock upon the front door carried another letter expressing sympathy wrapped in carefully disguised curiosity. Earl Pembroke sat alone in his study, staring at unopened correspondence from creditors who would soon discover that the Ashcombe alliance had completely collapsed. His wife, Lady Pembroke, found Charlotte calmly packing several books into a travelling trunk. "You are leaving?" Charlotte nodded. "I think it best. Where will you go?" "Aunt Margaret has written several times asking me to visit her estate in Kent." Lady Pembroke crossed the room and gently touched her daughter's shoulder. "You have done nothing requiring exile." "I know. Then why leave?" Charlotte looked around the familiar chamber where she had spent her childhood. "Because every room in this house reminds father of what has been lost. You are not the failure here." "No." Charlotte closed the trunk carefully. "But staying will make it harder for everyone to heal." Her mother embraced her without another word. It was the longest embrace they had shared in many years. 2 days later, before much of London had risen from sleep, Charlotte quietly departed Pembroke House. No grand farewell accompanied her journey. No procession of servants lined the entrance. Only a modest carriage rolled through the nearly empty streets before joining the southern road toward Kent. As London disappeared behind her, Charlotte watched church spires slowly fade into the morning mist. She did not know what awaited her. She only knew she had refused to become a substitute. Back in Grosvenor Square, Nathaniel resumed his ordinary routine with mechanical precision. Estate documents occupied his mornings. Meetings with solicitors filled his afternoons. Political dinners and formal obligations consumed his evenings. To every observer, the Duke appeared unchanged. His composure remained flawless. His reputation remained secure. Only those who had served him for many years noticed subtle differences. His longtime butler observed untouched meals returning from the dining room. His valet noticed the Duke spending unusually long hours awake after midnight. His steward discovered unfinished correspondence lying abandoned across the library desk. Nathaniel himself struggled to understand the quiet unease settling over his normally disciplined mind. He had expected relief after the broken engagement. Instead, Ashcombe House felt strangely hollow. One evening, while reviewing legal papers concerning the cancelled marriage settlement, his solicitor cautiously cleared his throat. "My lord." Nathaniel looked up. "There remains one document requiring your signature." He reached automatically for the pen. The solicitor hesitated. "It formally records that Lady Charlotte Pembroke voluntarily dissolved the engagement." Nathaniel's hand stopped. Voluntarily. The single word lingered in his thoughts. She had not begged. She had not attempted to persuade him. She had not sacrificed her dignity for wealth or status. She had simply walked away. Few ladies of the ton would have possessed such courage. Fewer still would have accepted the consequences so calmly. Nathaniel signed the papers. Yet instead of satisfaction, he experienced something unfamiliar. Regret. Meanwhile, Charlotte found unexpected peace among the gentle countryside of Kent. Her widowed Aunt Margaret welcomed her without questions or judgment. The modest estate lacked the grandeur of Ashcombe Hall, yet its orchards, gardens, and rolling meadows offered something London never could. Silence. Each morning Charlotte walked through fields sparkling with dew. She read beside ancient oak trees. She assisted her aunt in visiting tenants and organizing parish charities. Gradually, The relentless gossip of the capital became little more than a distant memory. One afternoon, while helping her aunt distribute blankets to several elderly villagers, Aunt Margaret watched Charlotte speaking kindly with a widow whose husband had never returned from the wars. "You have a remarkable gift," the older lady observed during their carriage ride home. Charlotte smiled faintly. "For folding blankets. For seeing people." Charlotte looked puzzled. "Most ladies notice appearances. You notice loneliness." Charlotte remained thoughtful. "I suppose lonely people are easier to recognize." Her aunt studied her carefully. "You are speaking of yourself." Charlotte gazed through the carriage window at fields washed golden by the setting sun. "I was." Aunt Margaret reached for her hand. "No, my dear." She squeezed it gently. "You were simply waiting for the place where you could finally belong." The words settled deeply within Charlotte's heart. For the first time since leaving London, she allowed herself to believe that her life might hold purpose beyond marriage. Back in the capital, invitations for the remainder of the London season continued arriving at Ashcombe House. Nathaniel attended several grand entertainments out of obligation. At elegant ballrooms illuminated by thousands of candles, ambitious mothers discreetly introduced accomplished daughters. Beautiful young ladies smiled with practiced charm. Conversations flowed politely. Music echoed beneath magnificent ceilings. Yet Nathaniel found himself unexpectedly comparing every encounter to quiet conversations that had never truly happened. None of these women spoke with Charlotte's thoughtful honesty. None possessed her quiet strength. None would have returned a duke's ring rather than surrender their self-respect. Weeks passed. The realization grew impossible to ignore. He had judged one sister by beauty. He had dismissed the other without ever learning who she truly was. Late one evening, standing alone beside the library window where Charlotte had placed the ring upon the table, Nathaniel looked across the moonlit gardens. The room appeared exactly as it had that unforgettable night. Everything remained unchanged. Except him. He finally understood that the greatest mistake of his life had not been losing Amelia. It had been failing to recognize Charlotte before she chose to walk away. Far beyond London's glittering ballrooms, Charlotte stood beneath flowering apple trees at her aunt's peaceful estate, unaware that the man who had once believed she could never compare with her sister had begun questioning every certainty upon which he had built his carefully ordered life. Neither could imagine that fate, which had separated their paths with quiet finality, was already preparing to bring them together again under circumstances neither duty nor pride would be able to control.